Welcome to the Kit Car History File series, where we'll be going through the industry's past. We'll be visiting old marks of long ago, some modern ones, some mostly older stuff. A lot of archive information with photographs and information on the cars they made, the people involved, and what happened to them. Hi, welcome to the Total Kit Car YouTube channel. My name's Steve Hull, editor of TKC Mag and TotalKitCar.com. And I'd like to welcome you to another episode of our Total Kit Car History File series. If you're new around here, welcome. Don't go yet. Have a little listen to what we're trying to do with these little videos, and that is to promote and highlight a wonderful UK kit car industry, which in 2024 celebrates, or celebrated, depending on when you're listening to this, a marvellous 75 years of existence, and it's something we think deserves to be trumpeted, really. And we're doing our little bit in our own way to try and achieve that, really. And if you're an old hand round here and we welcome you warmly and welcome you back indeed. When I say our, the process we're doing this with in association with the TKC Mag video editor Neil Winnington, who runs Enwin Motors YouTube channel, and Neil runs some exclusive stuff, we run some exclusive stuff, and there's also a crossover there as well when we run each other's videos, all in the name of promoting the kit car industry. And so if you haven't done so already, if you'd please subscribe to both channels. It won't cost you a penny to do so, and you'll be notified every time a new video drops, or whatever the hell they call it. Modern technology is beyond me, really. I'm stretching. And also, yeah, make sure you hit the all button, because then you'll know everything every time we do one. We do these once a week, normally. Sometimes you're lucky, boys and girls, and you get two, but it just depends, really. And also, of course, if you could hit that like button on the way out, that'd be really good. I'm not entirely sure why it'd be really good, but I think it'll be really, really good. So I'm told. So if you could do that, that'd be great. Thank you very much. So anyway, without further ado, this time we're looking at a proper diva. It's a little 60s mark from South London called Diva Cars. They came from a marvellous little place. Now, I come from that part of South London originally. And it's called Penge, although if people want to be posh in Penge, they used to refer to it as Ponge. And I noticed it, a friend of a friend, I noticed the other day called it West Annerley. And Annerley is a suburb, next door neighbour, I guess, if you will, going towards Elmer's End, if you know that part of South London. And he referred to Penge as West Annerley, which is I've heard it all now. And I did actually highlight the fact that I asked him where he lived, and he told me, and I said, no, you live in Penge, mate. Be proud. Anyway, for reference, it's pincered by Crystal Palace, Sydenham, and the aforementioned Annerley. Anyway, I guess only a very few people would know that the Diva Garage business was one of Britain's most successful motorsport marques pro rata, given its size. Tiny company. Another point of fact about Penge, or Ponge, was that Rolling Stones, the late Rolling Stones bassist Bill Wyman, he grew up in Penge. Although I did read somewhere, I think it is his biography, that he described his childhood as scarred by poverty. So I don't know what that says about Penge, or if he was referring to Penge. But anyway, back to Diva. And the man behind the company was an aviation engineer called Don Sim. He was born in Lewisham, another famous South London suburb, in 1931. And after he did his national service in the RAF, he enrolled at the Chelsea College of Automobile and Aircraft Engineering, where incidentally his classmates included Mike Hawthorne and Jackie Epstein. So aircraft, or aviation in general, and motorsport were very important to Sim in the early 50s, and he built a special on a clapped out Raleigh 9, although he replaced the engine at a later date with a supercharged 1500 Alfa Romeo engine, albeit with no body, that allegedly, and again this is a big allegedly, had previously been driven by Tazio Nuvolari. Okay, moving on. Anyway, Sim had actually bought that project from a chap called Mike Handley, with whom he developed a close friendship, which would later lead them going into business together. They built a car in Sim's garden shed, for the 1172 750 Motor Club race class, that was designed by Handley, helped by Sim and Epstein and a few other friends. And while all this was going on, though, Sim landed himself a really plum aviation-related job in Beirut. And when he returned to the UK in 1956, he'd given his instructions while he was away, because I think he was like the band leader. And when he came back, he found that it was nothing like what he wanted or expected or indeed intended. So he started again. He designed a simple ladder frame chassis, used all the running gear from that special, and called it the Yimkin, an Arabic word for maybe. And this led directly to the formation of another little company called Yimkin Engineering, again with Mike Handley in tow. A new prototype was designed for the 1172. I believe it was a basic cycle wing car that Sim raced for 2 seasons, but inevitably was outgunned by the bigger and more wealthy tuners with bigger budgets. So he switched to a larger BMC. I put my teeth in today. BMC A series engine and moved to the 1000cc sports car class, which he fared a little better. In addition to building those little race cars, Yimkin specialised in A-series tuning, and they were pretty successful. Based in the centre of London, Ellis Street, which I believe is just off of just behind the Cadogan Hall in Chelsea, which is like a side road off of Sloane Street, I think. Even back then, Sim was punching above his weight. And even the Yimkin brochure for the day was a very sophisticated little effort with a brilliant strapline on the cover, which read, "Millionaire or penniless enthusiast, the Yimkin is designed for you." And I love that. I love some of those 60s marketing material and their straplines that they used on their brochures. Formula Junior was a popular motorsport category in those days, of course, and in the right hands, Yimkin in a Formula Junior could be really competitive. Fully built, those cars cost £880, which, according to the marvellous inflation tracker that I punched that number into, is about 15 grand in today's prices. Rolling chassis you could buy sort of like a glorified kit from £500. And if you paid them another £50, they build it for you, as long as you took them your engine and gearbox. And most customers chose the Ford 105E. And they could tune that to you if you wished to stage 3 levels of tune. Ultimately, though, just 6 Yimkins were sold, with 4 of them going overseas. And Handley it was who was always suggesting that they offered a full-blown works Formula Junior car rather than a converted 1172, while he also wanted to develop a road-going car. Although the fact they couldn't really agree, and the fact that the two partners, Handley and Sim, both had young families, young men with young families, Yimkin ceased to exist in late 1960, I think it was. So Sim once again turned to his reliable backstop, the aviation world, and he took a job with BOAC as an engineer on Lockheed Constellations. Although he probably didn't realise then that he hadn't really done with cars, far from it. One of those 2 Yimkins that remained in the UK, one of those 6 Yimkins that remained in the UK, of which there were 2, went to a chap called Leo Bertorelli, and he was one of South London's premier purveyors of ice cream. And Sim and Bertorelli developed a friendship. And indeed, the latter, Bertorelli, engaged Sim's tuning skills on his Triumph TR3 that he raced and regularly beat bigger and more lauded rivals. And I think that's indicative of the fact that Sim was a pretty handy engine tuner. And indeed, Bertorelli rated him so highly that he set him up in a garage in Penge. And he also brought in another of his businesses and put it in that garage, Tunex. He ran a company called Tunex Conversions. and Sim was put in charge of that too. Kind of, I think they sort of still ran separately, but they were kind of absorbed into one, if you will. That was an offer that Sim couldn't refuse, even though he had a really good job with BOAC, British Overseas Airways Corporation, I think, which all ended up being funneled into what became British Airways, of course. Anyway, he did indeed go and work in Penge for Bertorelli. Although Bertorelli didn't just want to concentrate on engine building and tuning, he actively encouraged Sim to think about building his own car once more. Although Sim was reluctant after the way that the Imkin enterprise had ended, but he was persuaded. But then there's another famous, I don't know if it's a quote, if it's a genuine quote, but he was reported to have said, if I do build another car, it won't be a prima donna, or words to that effect. And then I don't know who the works foreman was or his name, but he's reported to have retorted, no, we don't want a diva, do we? Which I'd love it to be true. If it was, great. Certainly gave the little company its name, Diva Cars. So work really became that plausible explanation for the company name is good, I think. But work began on what became the first Diva, and he actually revised an old Yimkin chassis, fitting it with a live axle, a 750 Formula Heron body. They were another localish little GRP manufacturer, GRP maker and specials builder, and they were run by a guy called George Bishop, and they were based in Greenwich. And that body was made to fit the chassis. Despite Diva structure speaking, they decided to go with a tuned Ford 105E because that's what Sim really knew and liked. And it may not have been the prettiest vehicle, but from the outset, in a guy called John Bloomfield's hands, it was competitive straight out the gate. 10 podiums with 7 wins from 10 starts in 1962. They built a second car, which is probably more like the car that we kind of associate with being a Diva GT. And that was more sophisticated all round. It had IRS, independent rear suspension. Sorry, I shouldn't assume everyone knows what that means. A Watts linkage and Triumph running gear, unsurprisingly. And Sim had designed that new body. But on the eve of the racing car show in 1963, he decided it wasn't right, and they didn't like it. I think he was prone to changing his mind clearly at the last minute, which I think caused a bit of disruption. Anyway, the first proper Diva GT, they were offered as complete kits, and that included the full 105E engine, twin Weber carbs, and stainless steel exhaust for, I think it was £860, which is about £12,500 if you allow for inflation today. They were always struggling for money, even though they had the patronage of Bertorelli. They were always, like all their contemporaries in the 60s, they were always scratching around for money. And I guess someone put this theory to me the other day, actually. I think it's a very reasonable one. The companies pretty much made too much in-house rather than subcontract things out or buy stuff off the shelf. They wanted to build it all in-house, and that cost money, of course. And I think that was something that impinged on many of those companies, including Diva. One thing that set that Diva GT apart was the suspension. And it had very long wishbones at the front, I believe. It was notable for that. Although Tunex/Diva never ran an official works race team, Sim and his little band of staff, they readily supported their most successful customers. And one of the most victorious in a Diva was a guy called Doug Mockford. He finished second in the BRSCC's 500 Club Trophy, in the 1000cc class. And even Don Sim would turn out in a Diva GT fairly regularly in that series. And racing indeed was their bread and butter. That was their main core business. Lots of people asked them if they could make a road car, but they always looked at themselves as being a racing car or sports racing car manufacturer. Although there was a tentative step into road going activities. I think in their brochure of 1964, they did actually advertise a road going version, priced from £940, 13,300 I think that equates to today, allowing for the dreaded. But I think they only sold 4 of those. So it's clear really that customers saw them as building track cars. The Diva GT Racer, if you just wanted a track version, was £50 more expensive at £990. But I also noticed that they offered, and I find this is great. I love some of this stuff from the 60s, I really do. In the brochure, that 64 brochure, they had a Diva GT, a strengthened model. That was the word they used, strengthened. And they charged £1,117, quite a lot more money for that indeed. But that one also added the option of a 1600 Ford Lotus twin cam engine. Although their standard choices were that 105E, or indeed they also offered a Hillman Imp, Coventry Climax derived unit. Has to be said though that amongst those club racers and decent ones at that, national level drivers, there were some really good drivers cut their teeth in a Diva. John Miles was one, and I believe, well, in fact, I know Jackie Oliver, late sports car great, and also a Formula 1 driver. He learnt his craft in a Diva GT. John Miles, I think, is notable in a Diva for winning 16 out of 17 races in the Red X Trophy Series of 1965, which is some going. Anyway, in 1960, that same year, 1965, Leo Bertorelli was struggling to run his 2 businesses. More than that. He had a construction firm, the ice cream business, and Tunex, of course, along with Diva. So he had 4 businesses. Several were quite diverse from each other. And he wanted to streamline his operations, really. So... in fact, I've used the word Diva when I shouldn't have done, really. Tunex became Diva Cars in 1965. He officially amalgamated the two. Everybody refers to Diva as being Diva right from the outset. But if we're going to look at the official story, Tunex, those first Divas were under the Tunex banner until 65, when Tunex became Diva Cars. Anyway, and Sim and his team moved out to a couple of railway arches in Camberwell. I'm mentioning some really good old South London places here. Behind a chap called John Bloomfield's garage. The parting was a happy one. And Bertorelli retained that premises in Penge. I think his construction company went into there. I think, might be wrong. And he remains an important figure in Diva's history, of course. And he continued to race and do some rallying at national level. And indeed, he sold his ice cream empire to Lyons Maid, a famous, along with Walls, a famous British ice cream maker. Although they kept him on a retainer, on the condition that he got rid of his other business interests, though. That's kind of the kicker, really, which is one of the reasons I think Diva's time was limited, because he had to withdraw his patronage from the company, and Don Sim took over complete control. Let's just talk about Bertorelli for a minute. I was lucky enough. I grew up in that South London area, and I always remember it was an ice cream lover's. If you're a kid, then it was an ice cream lover's paradise, really, because in that area around sort of Catford, Lewisham, South Norwood, there was three companies that were pretty well known on that turf: Tony Bell, Bertorelli, and the name Rossi, which if you found a Status Quo might ring a bell. Francis Rossi's nan ran an ice cream company in Catford. Proper old school. And I think Rossi's one of my favourite, actually. But as a kid, I remember Tony Bell and I remember Bertarelli ice cream vans. That kind of gives me an indication of how old I am. But anyway, never mind. Anyway, back to Diva. And they introduced a second model, the Valkyr GT. And this one was intended to plug the gap between a track and a road car. So it was a combi car, really. It could be used in either. And it was pretty successful in motorsport. It had similar engineering underpinnings, unsurprisingly, to the Diva GT. But it was prettier, I think, in my eyes. It made its debut at the Racing Car Show of 65, or was it 66? But anyway. Sim now, he was an ambitious chap, and he was always looking for an angle. He's a good South London boy, so he would be. And he built a demo car with a Hillman imp engine. And the hope of that, he had a little bit of an angle there. He was hoping to persuade Roots' then competition manager, Marcus Chambers, to race a couple as an experiment alongside their existing work Sunbeam Tigers, just to see and to show him what could be done. He even came up with a new name for the Valkyr, the Demon, which, if you look up the meaning for imp on a search engine, you'll find there you go. So Demon was a good name, and it was quite clever. Although interested, Chambers never pursued that idea. So Sim picked his toys up and chucked a Ford engine back into put a Ford engine back into the Valkyrie. Well, changed its name back to the Valkyrie in the process. So I think he took his ball, put it under his arm, and stropped off. Really. That Valkyrie had an interesting. I've seen it described as a birdcage style space frame chassis. It was pretty sophisticated, and it was quite a strong chassis. It could take up to 300 pounds, 300 brake horsepower, according to Diva Car's blurb. One customer did fit a Coventry Climax FPF, which I think is something like a 2.7 litre engine. Although there's no record of how successful that was. Rear suspension was as per Diva GT, but the front had an unusual horizontal and coilover arrangement with discs all round. They designed that body, as I mentioned, it was always intended to be slightly more upmarket, and they designed that one with Group 6 race regulations very much in mind. And Doug Mockford again and a guy called Mike Watton were very successful in Valkyries. And in fact, I think Watton actually raced one of those that car that the Demon that Sim had taken to speculatively even taken to Marcus Chambers. By this time, the Tunex Triumph tuning work had stopped, and Diva were concentrating on Ford and now A series primarily, mini engine primarily for tuning purposes and business. Sim had plans for even more sophisticated, dedicated road car, the 10F, and he brought in some new investors to help fund the development of that. But rather than silent partners, they got a little bit chirpy and got more involved in the business than Sim was expecting and wanting, indeed. And it wasn't long before his little team were up in arms and began leaving one by one. And I think by sort of late 66, Sim had effectively been forced out of his own company. And so he just went back to a job in aviation. I read something in an old copy of Motorsport magazine where he said of all the mistakes he'd made during his working life, he felt bringing in those new directors was perhaps the biggest. So there we have it, a very successful little sports car company with a potentially bright and very successful future had simply imploded due to politics. And the damage was compounded by 1967 when the company were made part of the Skodek Group, who at the time also owned JAP or JAPS engines and Royal Enfield motorcycle manufacturer. There was a flicker of hope when production shifted to the Isle of Wight, but that was soon extinguished and the curtain or the shutters finally closed on those railway arches for the last time in 1968. And right until the end, Diva customers were winning on the racetrack. Doug Moxford, Jim Hardeman, who I think he was winning the 1300 class at the Nürburgring 1000 kilometre race in 68, finishing a very creditable 38th overall. And all in all, by the time the fat lady had son, I think they'd won, that mark had won over 200 races. Not bad for a little company from Penge, I don't think. So if we look at the model chronology, just before we wrap up, the first that modified Heron Europa Heron 750 bodied version has been retrospectively christened the Diva A-type. But the first, the Diva that we kind of know and recognise would be the B-type. And they made 6 of those in 1962. And then the first proper GT was the C-type. One of these was converted for road use, indeed, very early on, when it was owned by a chap called Steve Pethybridge, who took car to the show at the Hindhead Kit Car Show, I remember, in 1978. I remember reading about that in one of Philby's magazines. Then came the D-type in 1964. They made 13 C-types, by the way. And then the biggest selling Diva of all, the D-type, came in 1964, and that had a longer nose and headlights that were ready for road use. And then then came the 10FS we talked about. This was the one that was really aimed at the road, more sophisticated, thicker GRP, proper sound insulation, rubber engine mounts, and it was less hardcore than the others. And it was this car really that ended up sort of sounded the death knell for Sim to be forced out of Diva. And then the Valkyr, they made 6 of those, that's all. That first prototype had that Hillman engine and was really called a Demon, really. I think if you look at the Chevron B6, I looked at that the other day, actually. There's some real similarities, and though they were several hundred miles apart, there were some similarities visually between those two cars, but I love both of them, actually. Who wouldn't turn down a Chevron B6? But that brings to the end of the little Diva story. So I hope you've enjoyed this one. Thanks for giving up a little part of your day. As I said, if you could hit the like button on the way out, I'll turn the lights off. You hit the like button, and I look forward to welcoming you next time, I hope. And thanks for visiting. And wherever you are in the world, have a great day. And thank you.